Welcome to the Vantage HR Influencers Podcast. This podcast is sponsored by Vantage Circle, the simple and AI-powered rewards and recognition platform for employee engagement.
Even after the pandemic, most companies are still forgetting that our employees' emotional wellness is the core cornerstone of their success in today's competitive business world. It's high time for us to consider what we're doing to reintegrate our employees back into the workforce while they're still going through a difficult time. Now, many questions arise here. First is, why aren't we taking better care of our employees, even though we know that they are our most valuable asset? Secondly, and most importantly, how can we move towards a business ecology that is more emotionally welcoming and more emotionally inclusive? Hi everyone, I'm Sushmita, and for this episode of the Vantage HR Influencers Podcast, please join me in sharing this conversation on emotional inclusion in the workplace with my guest today, Sunita Wazir, who is working as a Senior Global Wellbeing Manager with Unilever. Welcome to the show, Sunita.
Thank you. Lovely to be here. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for joining me in this conversation, Sunita. So before we start with the topic, it would be great if you can tell us about your background and your professional journey till date.
Sure. Very happy to. So I'm Sunita, and I've been working a little over 26 years now across some really good businesses. So I've been fortunate to work for some of the best companies in the world. And it is something that I have completely enjoyed very much. So I started my career back in the day in the early 90s with Delta Airlines, which is a US-based carrier. And there I was working on in-flight operations and managing the team of a few hundred people across India. And then moved on from there after a really, really lovely international career onto working with the Tata Group, which is a wonderful place to work. It's something that really sort of touched me at a deep core and very much matched my values. And I was there for nearly 2 years. And since then, I've now been with Hindustan Unilever Limited, where I have completed 10 years, where I've worked across different expertise roles. So it's been a very fulfilling career, and I feel like it's taken me a while, but I feel like I'm living my purpose in my current role. So that's a phenomenal experience.
Yeah, so you are the Senior Global Wellbeing Manager with Unilever, right? Isn't it?
That's right. That's the role I have, yes.
And today, going by your profile, by your expertise, we have taken the topic of emotional inclusion in the workplace. So let's start. Sunita?
Yes.
Would you like to start by telling us what is emotional inclusion exactly?
Yes, absolutely. So, emotional inclusion or inclusion for that matter, inclusion is a really, really important part of, how the workplace culture showcases itself, right? It's about how people feel. Ultimately, it's not just about building emotional trust. It's also about the work environment on a day-to-day basis. So simply put, it's basically accepting within the corporate, workplace, the opportunity for people to be themselves, to be able to be their whole selves, to bring their whole personality, to be able to be normal and natural. And, the pandemic has done that, right? I mean, we don't have any choice. Our workplace is now our home for many of us, and it continues to be that. And therefore, those barriers or layers or the posturing that we might have done at some point are all gone now because we see everyone in their entirety. Right. So that's really what emotional inclusion is. It's just how accepting the workplace is towards individuals and their varied needs, diverse needs.
Right. So it is a part of our diversity and inclusion activities, isn't it?
It's a part of everything. Yes, it's a part of equity, diversity, inclusion. It's also a part of well-being. It's a part of mental health. You can't have good mental or emotional health or holistic health and well-being unless you feel like you can be yourself. So let me use an example, right? Being an emotionally inclusive workplace or being emotionally included means that you're not worried about how you're being perceived. There is no anxiety in your mind about how you can share something like, for example, recently we've all had an unfortunately long stint with this pandemic and COVID.
Right.
Just being able to share how you feel, right? I had COVID earlier in Jan, and it was really not nice. It was a very bad experience for me. And I continue to have, headaches and fatigue even now. It's been 5 weeks almost. But I'm able to share. I'm fortunate I'm at a workplace. I work with people where I can tell them, you know what, I've been at work a few hours and my head really hurts. Just being able to be open, being able to share what's going on with you. I think that's what emotional inclusion really is, to be able to embrace what you're experiencing and share it and not be judged and not have any fear of consequences. That's, to me, an example of emotionally inclusive work environment.
So it is more on the other side, isn't it? Like you can tell someone, that you can tell that other person how you're feeling. So that the other person has also to be very acceptable, isn't it?
Absolutely. It's about shared vulnerability.
Yes.
Very well put, Sushmita. Exactly. You got to the point. It is about being able to share your own vulnerability, about having the appetite to hear other people's vulnerability and not judge them, not use it against them. That's to me, a place where you feel like an equal. Now, of course, there are cultural differences, right? I mean, people in different markets or different countries will react differently. I work in the global workplace. I lead the global wellbeing agenda, and I work with people across many, many countries. Culturally, there may be, nuances. In Europe, people are far more open, perhaps in the US. In Latin America and Asia, not so much, right? We're very similar. So how you open up, the levels of introversion, the levels of sort of openness are very different. But when you are in a global workplace, like we all are right now, it's important that even when someone may be an introvert or they may not be very open, we should truly listen. Ultimately, what do people want? They want to be heard. They want to have the opportunity to speak and to have sort of, non-judgmental listening. And therefore then, sharing more about themselves, and inevitably that also boosts their performance because they can be honest and they can say, this is not my good time of the day. I'm feeling really low energy. And what that automatically does is then they can manage their work around where their energy is high. And therefore that facilitates far better performance by the individual. So in a way, it's not just about the nice to do things. It's also for organizations to get the best out of their people, to build a culture, to build leadership, to build line managers and supervisors, opportunities and readiness to be far more open, because that improves both the work culture. So you're a great employer and people stay with you. And, we've heard about the great resignation and loss of talent and war for talent. But also equally, there is the other dimension where work gets better. Work gets delivered far better when people feel enabled, where they feel they have the opportunity to work the way that work works for them. That's a lot of words, but
so
that's
it's
how
more
I see.
about, I think, about one-to-one communication in the workplace between a manager and an employee. Or it's like a group effort?
Yes, absolutely. One-to-one relationship. Also one-to-many, right? One-to-one, very important. Our relationship with our line managers or our supervisors actually becomes a crux of how we feel about the organization, right? When we rate a company, we're talking about the people we interact with. So our line manager, our teams, our extended teams, the stakeholders that we report into, right? How they make us feel, how we make them feel. The opportunity to be heard, the whole concept of psychological safety. That's something that, you can't, for the love of money, you can't buy that. That's an environmental necessity. And even more now than ever, to feel emotionally included, there has to be a dimension of psychological safety within the workplace.
But there are still some employees, we can find employees who don't feel comfortable to come forward and speak. They always stay a bit behind from the other employees who share everything they feel in the workplace. So how can we build confidence among those employees?
So, I really believe, Sushmita, that building trust is a two-way process. When you start in a new work relationship, it takes 3-6 months to really build trust, right? So for a lot of people that actually change roles in this time of the pandemic, where there was no social interaction, you can't see physical cues, it's really hard to build trust. So then how then do you build an environment where people open up and they feel okay? Right. For many people, like I said, culturally, they just may not be in a place where they want to share. So they may be guarded. But there are signs and symptoms and cues. An astute leader, a caring line manager should be able to
understand the hints,
start looking at the signs. Exactly. The energy level, the emotions that the person is bringing across. What we do a lot is we use a lot of video, right? We as far as possible, when people are comfortable, we ask them to come on video calls, because that way you can build rapport. You can see how the person is doing. You get a sense of what's going on. Now, remember, the other thing that's happened is for nearly 2 years, people have worked alone or isolated or lonely. Or some people are into, very crowded homes or crowded locations. That makes it hard sometimes to use video. But you have to use cues to just see the energy of the other person. And if you want to make them feel comfortable, if you want to really make them speak, it's going to be important for you to do, voice matching, crossover matching, energy. You try and breathe the way the other person is breathing. You slow down. You don't try to fill silence. Be comfortable with silences and hold a space for the other person to speak up. I think that's really, really important. Yeah. We're all in such a hurry. There's a very interesting Harvard Business study which says, when you're asked, how are you? People say, I'm fine, almost, ridiculously often, right? If I ask you right now, how are you? You'll say, I'm fine. But if I want to really know how you are, I'll probe a little deeper. I won't stop at the fine. If I know that something's not all right, I'll go a little further, go a little deeper, pull at that thread. Make the space. So, leaving it at I'm fine, I believe the study says, people only mean it 14% or 19% of the time when they say I'm fine. That means when you're saying I'm fine, 1 out of 5 times you're really fine. The rest of the time you're feeling a little low, a little vulnerable, a little emotional, but you won't say it because we want to posture a part of ourselves, right? We want to showcase ourselves as invincible, strong, available, achiever. I mean, there's so much, the social narrative at work is so much about being more resilient. But resilience is not about just being stronger. It's not that narrative of the Avengers where you've got to be stronger, able to do everything yourself. Resilience is also about being able to get the right resources, the right support. So if you put all of this together, how do you get people to speak up? You hold a space. You ask a little deeper. You probe. You share your own emotional state. You share your own vulnerability as a leader. And even in a conversation between peers. We do a lot of work with peer support. So we offer Mental Health Champions. It's a lovely program we've started at Unilever. And across the world, we've got already 3,800 people out of our large workforce that have volunteered to come forward and be a listening ear to others. So this is not part of their job. They just came forward and offered to do this because this is something that drives them. They want to do something about the problem. So the last 1 year and a couple of months, we've trained 3,800 people to have a right conversation where they can listen and hold the space. So at the workplace, it doesn't always have to be the reporting relationship where you open up. You have to build networks. You have to find other people. And if you don't have that, find a trained colleague that wants to listen to you. And of course, we all offer employee assistance programs and, helplines with counseling for those people that need to have a deeper conversation. So different ways, different cues. It's about building these support systems and resources in the way we work rather than making them hard to reach. So making support and anytime, anywhere support accessible to everyone is critical in the language that they speak in, right?
It is critical. Yeah. Right. And all this makes a workspace a very psychologically safe one. And it helps a lot in employee motivation also for higher productivity.
Yes, exactly. The whole productivity angle that I was talking about earlier, performance improves. In a psychologically safe space, people feel like their voices are heard, their ideas come in, right? So what do we want? Today, we need tremendous innovation, right? We cannot keep doing work the way we did it. We have to find new ways of working. And we need to deliver work. Exactly. We've got to keep changing. Agility is the way to go. And so in this environment, psychological safety is just a belief that it's a safe space to take interpersonal risk. You will not be punished or humiliated. You can speak up about your ideas, questions, concerns, or mistakes, right? So there are traps around psychological safety that the fear that we all have, and we all have fear, it just is very different at different
Right.
levels. The fear in the workplace sometimes is feeling like you may be coming across as ignorant, you may come across as incompetent, you don't want to sound overly negative, you don't want to sound disruptive. And those are the fears that hold people back from opening up and speaking up. But we need innovation, we need new ideas. So what we need to build is a workplace where everyone is open-minded, there's a lot of mutual respect, candor, trust, curiosity, and support. That's one of the things that we lost, when this pandemic happened. We lost our curiosity. We weren't exploring, we weren't reading, we were doom scrolling, right? We were reading news, we were following and chasing the issues going on. And curiosity went away. But a psychologically safe workplace is one where people know that they will be heard. And even if they made mistakes, it's okay, we learn from the failure. That's where, magic happens. And companies that do that, companies that offer the space to speak up, companies that offer the support are the ones that actually are doing all right in the workplace right now.
Talking about the pandemic, Sunita, what trends do you see workplaces, for progressing towards destigmatizing mental health of employees?
So, Sushmita, stigma is the biggest hindrance or, inherent flaw in all the work that we do. All of us that work in the space of mental health well-being.
The fear of judgment.
Exactly. This huge barrier, the way I will be perceived. In our country, it tends to be bigger. It just tends to be, socially so unacceptable. In a lot of markets, there is a lot of progress that's happened on addressing stigma, but we are still on that journey, right? And interestingly, stigma, while it holds people back, it also causes so much harm because the number of people that seek support are very few. And, even issues, the big words around mental health, right? Depression, all of these conditions are very much manageable with the right support and the right medication.
Right.
And that unfortunately doesn't happen. So one of the things I've also worked on over the years is inclusion of people with disabilities, inclusion of proud community. And it's just, the reality is that stigma holds back so much. What the pandemic did was actually a gift. It accelerated the opportunity for people to speak up. It accelerated the workplace's need to make mental health support more obvious. So what are the trends we've seen? We've seen that mental health has taken a hit, right? A lot of people have suffered. They may not talk about it, but whether it was isolation, whether it was overwork, whether it is fear of the disease, loss of freedom, grief, just the inherent ambient grief that people feel from losing their freedom to go out for a walk, driving to work, having a coffee with a colleague without planning it, just not having time, just more to do at home. So many different dimensions of it. The trend we're seeing in the workplace is people are working, longer hours. They are feeling more vulnerable. They're feeling a social disconnect. Many people have lost their purpose, so they're not connected to their work. But there is also a mental health tsunami that's come our way, right? There's just been so many people affected. Earlier, mental health was seen as something far away and that happens to someone else. But we all have mental health. And that's something we've had to acknowledge. There are days where we feel blah, and there are days where we feel really high energy. Just accepting and acknowledging that, just knowing that we're all vulnerable, that we're all emotionally, strung, just being in this lockdown space has made us face those fears. And what it's also done is helped companies to just understand that a lot of solutions have had to come in. Whether those solutions are, more leave, access to support, mental health first aiders, mental health champions, whether it's peer support, whether it is, just in the workplace opening up, breaking down of barriers, breaking down of walls. I think what's happened is it's made conversations more real. It's made workplace support real. I know a lot of our employee assistance program providers are, flooded with new companies signing up and offering counseling. And it is going to make, reaching out for support more mainstream. And that's phenomenal. I think the younger generation, kids, students who stayed home for way too long in our country are now opening up and speaking for support. And that's actually having a domino effect. That's leading to elders having support. It's leading to far more open conversations. So wherever you are on the spectrum of mental health, the good news is now there are people ready to listen and help is at hand, and far more open conversations are happening. And I think that's phenomenal for the cause.
Also now it is about COVID. In the coming years, there might be some other disease, some other virus. So just like our physical health, for our mental health as well, prevention is better than cure. So it's a everyday thing that we should take care of our mental health.
Absolutely. I love the analogy of when someone says, just like you go to the gym to work out your
Exactly.
muscles. So
Exactly.
I'm a runner, Sushmita. I can't help but talk about running. I run regularly and, I'm a half marathoner and I've done that for 11 years. And I feel my mental health is balanced because of that, right? I feel every time I feel a lot of pressure, I want to wake up at 5 a.m. and go for a run because that helps. That is the reality, right? Equally, emotional health and emotional inclusion or mental health is something you need to work out those emotional muscles. You need to get that out, bottling up, holding back, not saying what's on your mind.
Asking ourselves, like we go to the gym for our physical health, we run, we do yoga, but asking ourselves, like, what did you do for your mental health today? That can be a great help for everyone.
Absolutely. And doing something like a practice. One of the things I learned in the pandemic was also, outside of being a mental health champion, I also learned to do mindfulness, mindful breathing. And that's been so amazing. Just pausing, giving your brain the space, going away from fight or flight and really not letting that adrenaline and cortisol rush to have its debilitating high stress effect. We can't remain in stress for periods of time, long periods of time. It's going to affect our physical body. It's going to affect our emotional health. So therefore, just knowing to pause, take 2 or 3 deep breaths and then continue. It's had a transformative effect for me. And I run a regular mindfulness practice within our workplace. And I think that's something that always helps. So now when I'm in a stressful situation or before I came on this podcast to chat to you, I just paused for a few minutes, did a bit of box breathing, which is go to the count of 4. So breathe in, 2, 3, 4, pause, 2, 3, 4. Breathe out, 2, 3, 4, pause, 2, 3, 4. If you do 4 to 5 cycles of this, athletes around the world, armed forces, military veterans, all of them use box breathing as a way to poise themselves. So just having a go-to, thing that you do, whether that is deep breathing, pranayam, yoga, whatever it is, ensuring you're doing something, you have a habit or a practice that works for you, that helps you deal with what's going on, and just learning that, making it, calendarizing it, putting in your calendar that you want to do a mindfulness practice or breathing. That's how habit change happens. And that's how we as employers need to build the right environment for people to learn these skills so that they can help themselves. Ultimately, it's about helping ourselves, right? When you're in a crisis, you've got to help others. We all do that naturally. But like in the airplane analogy, I always go back to my airline roots. That's where, first job always stays with you. You've got to put your own oxygen mask on first before helping others.
Exactly.
And that's something you need. That's something you need so much.
Great. Nicely explained, Sunita. Moving forward, would you say that companies should invest in an in-house therapist for their employees, or what other options do they have?
Absolutely. I think, companies should definitely offer counseling. They should offer in-house therapists. We should offer, just like we offer at the workplace, part of our employee engagement in the past years has been offering experiences. So experiences like yoga, Zumba, meditation rooms and all of that. And a lot of modern workplaces, we offer healthy nutrition. We're doing everything for different parts of our bodies. We should absolutely offer those solutions for the mind. So whether it's in-house therapists, whether it's through employee assistance programs, my suspicion is often people like to talk to someone from the privacy of their home quietly, or they like to, that's sort of what I've observed, that often people like to have anytime, anywhere access. The sort of monkey mind that works is usually very active in the middle of the night when, people feel that sense of loneliness. So sometimes making it available 24/7, 365 in the way people want it. Millennials, younger people may want to chat to someone rather than talk. So making all those avenues available, everything that technology is such a gift, right? The digital opportunities we have of making health available and help available is so phenomenal. Just making sure that we offer many different things. So no assumptions. Ask people what they want, depending on what your workforce is and what their preferences are. I believe this should be done with crowdsourcing. What helps most, what works best, and tailoring and customizing for each individual. You can't have a one-size-fits-all approach in help and support.
Yeah. Every person has their own demands in the sense that they have their own mental requirements, isn't it?
Exactly.
Yeah. Yes. Finally, Sunita, what would be your suggestions for our listeners today?
Well, I think it's fairly simply put, first of all, be self-compassionate. We've all gone through a very, very tough 23 months, right? These last 2 years have been hard on all of us. So my biggest plea to everyone would be self-compassionate. Give yourself, talk to yourself kindly, like you would to a dear friend or a child or someone who's suffering, because not being compassionate to ourselves is something we've become very hard and very demanding on ourselves. I must do this. I should be able to do many different things. So first message is be self-compassionate. Second one is, do something that you love, whether it is in fitness, whether it is in breathing, whether it's in outdoors, whatever it may be, whatever is your passion, give yourself that time. We often say, I don't have the time, but it's not about time. It's about prioritization, right? Putting yourself as a priority. It's really, really critical. And the third one is look out for signs. Look out for signs of deteriorating mental and emotional health in yourself. If you aren't sleeping for 6 to 8 hours, or your quality of sleep is not good, or you feel a loss of appetite, or you feel low energy and that low energy feeling continues for a few days or a number of days, or if you feel like, your mind is constantly working and going into a negativity thinking trap, speak to someone. Help is always available. So open up, reach out to someone, talk to someone, talk to an expert, talk to someone, the many free helplines. If you feel like you don't want to speak to someone at the workplace, I know that a lot of people believe that workplace is not the right place to talk about, their issues, but that's not true. It's absolutely confidential. Those guys are bound by very, very stringent standards. All of the counselors, they're people like you and me. So it's a safe space. Workplaces don't get to know it. Trust, believe in it. If it helps you, make time to write. And if you can, reduce your reliance on technology. I put my phone face down when I'm having a good conversation. I think giving people of ourselves is important. So do all of the things that make you happy. Be kinder to yourself and try and do one thing at a time. Multitasking is not as fantastic as it's believed to be. So focus on what you're doing and enjoy it completely. So those are some things I think that work in the emotional inclusion. Back to you, Sushmita.
So, Sunita, we are here in the end of this podcast. So would like to know how our listeners can reach out to you.
Well, I'm very active on LinkedIn. I love LinkedIn. I think it's a great place to connect to people. So I'm Sunita, Sunita Wazir, Wazir. I'm based out of Mumbai, India. And absolutely reach out to me on LinkedIn and we can have a conversation. Don't just say hello or hi. Write a message if you'd like to connect or have a conversation about something.
Right.
And I wish you all good emotional and mental health. Stay strong, stay safe, and do what you love. Make sure you reach out for your purpose. Do what gives you energy.
That was great talking to you, Sunita. Thanks for all the insights and thank you for joining me in this conversation. I hope you'll join me back soon.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. Stay well. Take care.
Thanks for listening to the Vantage HR Influencers Podcast. Please do subscribe to Vantage HR Influencers Podcast on Apple Podcast, Spotify, and our YouTube channel for new episodes.